have you, Miss Marjorie, and we've got some participants on here that we're ready to start. If you are, I hope you'll introduce yourself to them, please, and because I know you do better than I. And we thank you for being here. Okay.
You are so welcome. I want to thank Neighborhood Services for allowing us to have this opportunity. Thank you very much, Ms. McAllister. I am Marjorie Baker, Executive Director of One Place Family Justice Center. And One Place Family Justice Center is located in Montgomery, Alabama at 530 South Lawrence Street. And what we offer at One Place is a mission to provide comprehensive services and a support center that allows victims of domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking, and elder abuse to receive a series of immediate crisis intervention services under one roof. That's our concept, to have as many services as possible in the same building. Currently, One Place in Montgomery, Alabama is the first center that opened in 2010. We now have 2 additional centers, one in Jefferson County and one in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. But Montgomery Center currently offers services through case management, and that's through One Place. We also have Legal Services Alabama, 2 attorneys here. We have Montgomery Police Department. We have 6 staff members that work in the Family Violence Unit. And we also work with Jones School of Law, where we use some of their 2nd and 3rd year attorneys to help with legal issues. And before the COVID, we actually had a magistrate where you could sign a warrant. So we have anywhere from 4 to 5 on-site partners and a gamut of off-site partners, those who serve victims in the community that could come to our office, use a room, a private room, and provide victim services right here on the spot. The goal of this national concept is to not have victims driving throughout the city to receive immediate services. So at One Place, you can be here from anywhere of 30 minutes to 3 hours, getting all of the services that you need for yourself and your children's safety and protection. So that's just a quick overview of One Place in Montgomery, Alabama. If you visit our website, we have more information about what we have available. Our key service that we added on that's up under One Place also is our sexual assault program. We do have STAR, Standing Together Against Rape, where you can get forensic exams done 24 hours a day. So STAR is here all the time doing exams. So between the 4 or 5 partners, the building is very busy often. And then our off-site partners can come to the building and use different rooms if they need to. So that's an overview of One Place Family Justice Center. We will obviously be focusing on human trafficking today and human trafficking services. And so when we look at human trafficking, that is a huge issue in our city, in our state, and in our country. I know oftentimes we think that this is something that happens in other countries and individuals are brought in from other countries, but that is not true. The United States is the number 2 area for human trafficking business. So when we look at human trafficking, what are we talking about? What are we relating to? Because human trafficking, you kind of see TV shows. I know the Jeffrey Epstein scenario has given us sort of an insight into some of the challenges with human trafficking, but truly in the United States, it could be an average individual that works right in the office with you or serves in the same religious community that you serve in. Individuals that are citizens of the United States are the typical human trafficking victim. So when we look at the human trafficking definition, we're talking about the recruitment, the transportation, the transfer, the harboring, or coercion of intimidation, abduction, and deception, and the use of power and control. So it's not about kidnapping young girls and boys and taking them into this work. Human trafficking is something where individuals go in with the perception that they're doing one thing and it turns into something else. So human trafficking is very common in the United States and right here in our community. So when we look at human trafficking, there are typically two types. There's sex trafficking and labor trafficking. As you know, sex trafficking is actually what it's saying, where individuals are providing sexual services for money. And usually that money goes to the lead person, as we call them sometimes, the pimp or the actual owner of this business. So sex trafficking involves getting individuals engaged in having sex with others for a price. And typically, sex trafficking start out, unfortunately, what we see in one place is individuals thinking that they are engaged in a one-on-one relationship with a partner. This is their dating partner. This is their personal, intimate relationship partner that they have been coerced and deceived into believing that this individual is who they date singularly. So that individual starts out by agreeing to purchase things for them, provide them independent housing, providing them transportation, and providing them the things that they need. So they see this person as a partner, that victim. And then it moves into expecting that victim to bring in money by using their body to help pay some of those things, to help pay for some of the rent, to help pay for some the vehicles, monthly payments. So that victim then is asked to start sleeping with other individuals. And then the lead person or the pimp gets that money and has convinced that victim that they're using that money to pay those bills. And they're just doing this for a favor. So typically that's the scenario of sex trafficking, where it starts out pretending to be a partner relationship. But then that victim is not only asked, but that victim is under demand and power and control. To maintain that relationship, they have to follow through with XYZ. Labor trafficking is very, very hard to identify. Labor trafficking obviously is domestic services, domestic servitude, working with agencies and private companies to provide housekeeping services or farm services. And they actually are turning that money into, here again, a lead person, and they don't get to see that money. They actually are providing the work service, but they don't get paid directly. They're working up under, and sometimes they look like legitimate companies. But those individuals are not individuals who are brought in from other countries. They are hired by these companies. And then they become labor trafficked because they move from town to town. We had a case where the individual literally came from as far as California, lived with this young man and his wife, and she cleaned several homes for him. But she never saw any of the money. So she was never sex trafficked, but she did a lot of work, a lot of maid services and never saw the funds. And those funds were stated to her being used to pay some of the household bills, even though she lived with this person. So those are really hard to identify. You have to pay close attention to some of the signs. Victims that are not receiving a legitimate pay check. Individuals that don't have their names on anything. So it's under somebody else's name. And that's usually the lead person. Individuals who move from city to city or state to state to work in different areas because the lead persons are connected. This is, I mean, unfortunately, the internet and our computers have allowed for this type of service to grow tremendously. So these individuals, after they've worked in certain towns or have completed work on a farm or in a maid service, they may move to another whole town in another state far away because the individuals are connected through our computer system to bring on these victims to work in other towns when they need to get them out of town for whatever reason, or the lead person needs some more servitude work. So they work together as a team. It is a huge business in our country. It's a huge business, and it's hard to pinpoint. It's hard to identify that this is criminal behavior until you start looking more into the details of how the business is set up. So those are two key components of trafficking that we see right here in the United States. Some of the things that we want to talk about, we want to also mention that prostitution is different from human trafficking. Typically, prostitution may be an initial form, but that's where the individuals, male or female, have decided that this is something they're choosing to make money for their livelihood. Typically, human trafficking individual has been coerced and have no clue that they're doing this type of thing. Prostitution, they've decided. This is a decision. They're very aware that they're going to be a part of engaging with 3 to 6 and sometimes as many as 10 individuals a day. And they're in agreement to that. So prostitution is not the same thing as human trafficking. And you want to know the difference. Now I can tell you, lead persons or the pimp or the boss or whatever they call them, they prey on prostitutes because they know that they're comfortable with this kind of situation. But typically, prostitution is something separate from human trafficking. We also want to pay attention with human trafficking being something that the individual never exchanged the money with the victim. With prostitution, the victim gets that money either left on the table, left in the room somewhere. So it's a difference if you pay attention to the specifics. Alabama, believe it or not, is a prime area for this type of behavior. Number one, because we have some central interstate and traveling areas, 65 and 85 going through some of the larger cities that gets us to Atlanta, that gets us to some of the larger areas. It's a clear thoroughfare where sometimes we've seen where victims have been at truck stops and they've gotten out, or the boss has stopped and they've gotten out and tried to flee and run for safety in our area. Typically, they may meet another boss to exchange that individual so they won't have to travel so far. So our area is a prime central travel area for this type of behavior to happen. So in addition to those things, I want just to look at some stats and to look at some of the numbers that we're talking about with human trafficking. Because when we look at human trafficking, we want to pay attention to obviously abuse and sexual assault, because many of our victims will come into one place and say, I've been sexually assaulted because somebody was demanding and very aggressive. But when we start listening to the story, that person was hired by the boss or by the pimp. And then we have to go into more details of what's your history with that person, because it looks like just a stranger rape. But the more you talk to that victim and you learn that connection, that victim was exposed to this aggressive person through their pimp or through their boss. And then it starts going down the human trafficking road. But she came in just as a person that was raped by a stranger, or somebody that she was asked to meet at the hotel. So you have to go into details. But so when we look at some of the stats, we will know that 1 in 6 boys will be abused by the age of 16. That 1 in 9 girls under the age 18 will experience abuse by the hands of an adult. 93% perps know their victims. So we're not talking about this is stranger data. This is information where victims know each other, and it gets into that coercion, that demand, and that power and control. And so when we look at some of the human trafficking numbers, well, as I stated, this is the second largest criminal industry in our world, human trafficking. There is over $1 billion spent on this business each year in the United States. We're not talking about foreign countries. When we look at other stats, we want to look at that typically girls are usually, females are usually the optimal human trafficking victims, but males can be human trafficked too, especially in our world where the individuals are vulnerable. They have been maybe abused or violated as young children. Human traffickers know how to find those who are vulnerable. They know how to find those individuals. Some other things you want to look at when you start looking at those stats, I mean, what you realize is that just like some other criminal behaviors, because so much of this is done under the table, many of the numbers are very much underestimated because they can't get the full figures because so much is not reported. Victims will go years and years and never report that they were with an individual for 10 years and he had them sleeping with XYZ people for 8 of those 10 years. That victim will just somehow get away and change her life and never report that. So a lot of these numbers are underreported when we start talking about human trafficking victims. Some of the other things that I want you to realize is, as I mentioned earlier, this is very easy work because, and I don't know all of the name of the pages, but all of these back pages and all of these sites that are created undercover that police even have a hard time connecting to law enforcement. Online, this service starts online a lot of times. And of course, remember we have our young kids, and especially the last 2 years of COVID, that have been home on the computer all day. And they have individuals that suddenly pop up in their social media sites and start engaging them. So we are here to say that it likely increased over the last 2 years. If you pay attention to some of the news reports, individuals missing or young ladies leaving with a much older gentleman, and then there's a missing report, and then it's kind of said she was found, and then we don't hear anything else. They've connected typically, not all the time, but typically probably with the human trafficker. So over the last 2 years, I think we'll start seeing some more astronomical numbers when that data starts coming out in the next year or two. So online is the number one place where you can find human trafficking victims. Obviously, hotels and motels and truck stops, escort services, that is a big business. Escort services is what is presented on the computer, but it turns into where now this individual is being paid to have sex with this person, and that money goes to the lead person or the boss. Other places, obviously, are massage parlors, obviously gang situations, and starting out, as I mentioned, with prostitution services. So human trafficking can start through many different avenues. They just don't kidnap a person and put them in the backseat. It's usually starting out in very, very legitimate ways. And then it moves into this. And the victim, by the time they're into it, they did not realize what was happening to them. Some of the ways that we need to pay attention to human trafficking is, as an individual, I'll tell you, there was a young lady at a local Walmart that was very at at the point that somebody noticed her. She was very frantic. She was crying, and she was standing by, which I don't think they have many of those anymore. One of the local phone booths or something, and just crying profusely. Someone noticed her, and once law enforcement was called, she was actually 17, but she had an ID that the pimp helped her make, and then made sure that he paid for it, where she could get on the plane as a 19-year-old and fly by herself as an adult. And she got to a local Walmart, and he was supposed to pick her up there, and it had been several hours because she was coming to meet him as a partner. And but once law enforcement talked to her, she came from the Arizona area, and she was talked into coming to the local area. And when law enforcement kind of learned, because of course the boss had sort of a different name, the more they looked into the history of who she had been dealing with, they already had suspicions of him operating some kind of illegal business similar to this. So obviously, we helped law enforcement help her get back to Arizona before the human trafficker ever got to pick her up at Walmart. Because for whatever reason, she was there for several hours and he didn't pick her up. But just based on the dynamics of how he initiated that, it was headed down that road of law enforcement really feeling like she was headed into that service that they had suspected him of for several months now. So that was very, very eye-opening for law enforcement to learn details of how he was doing things, because she was sharing that with them. They interviewed her very thoroughly before she got back on a plane and went home. If you pay attention and a young person is with the older person and they have the inability to make eye contact, the presence of an older person that appears to be quote unquote a boyfriend or partner that seems controlling, this individual can't speak. That person is answering all the questions, no matter whether you're directing that question to that young victim. They're inappropriately dressed for their age now, and I know that's kind of challenging because our young folks can really dress past their age. I even have young family members. I have a 10-year-old that's as tall as me, and I'm almost 5'9". She's about 5'7", and she is 10. So I know it's kind of hard to base it on that, but pay attention if they are dressed inappropriately, much more than what their facial, because her face still looks 10. My family member, that is a 10-year-old face. Now she does not dress inappropriately, but just her height makes her look a little bit older. They're not in school. It's the middle of the day. and they're out with this adult. And typically it's the adult of the opposite sex. And the big thing is there's tattoos and branding. Human trafficking believes in branding because one boss getting a victim from some other state, they communicate through that way. Typically, it's on the back of the neck. It's some type of tattoo. I'm just telling you, law enforcement really has that kind of information because they do specific branding for victims that they have brought into the business for a period of time. They have multiple hotel keys, or they have just a large set of keys just on them all the time. They're very young and have excessive cash because they've been sent in the store to buy XYZ. So you have to kind of pay attention to those kind of things and be suspicious. Doesn't mean that we call the police all the time, but sometimes there's enough evidence that that customer in Walmart was just asking the young lady could she help her. And when the young lady started telling her story, the customer was smart enough to say, this is not making sense, and agreed to call law enforcement to talk to that young lady. Had that customer just said, go, here's $100, go get on the bus and go back home, that person, that local pimp would have been missed this time. So you have to kind of pay attention. And I know sometimes people are leery of questioning other people, but don't dismiss your intuition and your concerns and figure out what's the best way to address something if there's someone that needs some help. And that's where then you call law enforcement because they know the right questions to ask. And sometimes individuals will run away and not want to talk, but if that individual is in need, typically they will talk to law enforcement. Sometimes we lose them along the way. So those are just some brief facts and some information just to help with the awareness of human trafficking in our community and in our country. One place I can tell you is one of several agencies in the community that work with human trafficking. Many law enforcement departments are developing units to learn more about this type of business and to be able to respond appropriately. In addition to one place serving victims, because here again, we do sexual assault exams. So if that victim is coming in saying they're being raped, we're doing exams, and obviously our focus is not only to have evidence for legal proceedings, but to help that victim with things such as medications to address any STDs or anything that they may have caught in this process. So typically we're seeing sexual assault victims. So that's how we're getting connected to human trafficking victims. Montgomery Family Sunshine Center actually has a human trafficking shelter in one of the communities that they try and provide emergency services for individuals who are fleeing. Because I can tell you, human traffickers can find their, as I call them, their business partners faster than any other criminal perpetrator because they have so many connections. These are professionals that are doing this. So we try and have shelter services for victims. Well House, going down 65, is a huge program that now provides immediate housing and transitional housing for individuals near the Columbiana area. So there are shelters and programs in our areas that are trying to serve these victims and make sure that we have something when they're in an emergency situation. That's just some brief information. I don't know if you want me to cover anything else, Cynthia, but that's my immediate presentation, and I'm open for questions if we have time. I know that we're kind of late starting. I can't hear you.
I was trying to unmute everybody all at once, but it's not doing it for me. So it says attendees can unmute themselves now. So if you want to Speak up, just go ahead. I can't see most everybody, so can't like raise hands. Yeah,
One of the questions that I was going to ask that I think you answered is, do you work with do your agency work with little small towns in the local area around Montgomery and down 65? I think you answered that with the Columbiana comment.
Yes, we try very, very hard to stay connected to particularly housing programs that will help these individuals stay for a period of time until either they can get back home or they can get somewhere else safe. That's critical to keep partnerships and collaborations. But we do serve not only Montgomery County, one place in Montgomery also serves other counties. We serve Chilton, Elmore, and Otaga. And then that's going north. And then south, we serve Crenshaw, Lowndes, and Butler. And then we provide sexual assault services for victims out of Wilcox, Perry, and Dallas. So we serve about a 10-county area. And so individuals and law enforcement and agencies that are suspecting this kind of thing, we are definitely willing to work with them to get those victims what they need. We don't have centers in all of those cities. It would be nice to have satellites where victims just could walk in the building. But unfortunately, we're not financially there yet. But we do work with other agencies, definitely law enforcement and agencies that are helping these type victims. Now, Muscle Shoals, obviously, that's near the Florence area, so they help near that area. And then Jefferson County Family Justice Center has a series of counties that they cover too. Thank you for that question, Mr. Reed.
Thank you.
anybody else? No, no more questions?
So
Okay.
if you,
Well, go ahead.
excuse me,
Denise.
yes. So if you had a suspicion or something, so the best thing to do is to contact the police, or are you saying we contact one place if you have, if you need to contact someone, the first thing to do is just contact the police department?
Yes, law enforcement is probably going to be your number one place because more than likely you don't want to try and, number one, put that victim in your car. You don't know how far away that perpetrator may be. Number two, you don't know if you give them money, if they're going to use it wisely. So it's best to start with law enforcement, even though sometimes that can scare individuals away.
Okay.
And law enforcement, sometimes, even if the victim is not ready to talk, they will say, will you at least be willing to go to one place to talk to them and get an exam if you feel like you need an exam? So they sometimes may scare the victim off, but that's the first place to start. And there are particular components of law enforcement that are being trained on how to approach these victims. I know MPD has a couple of law enforcement officers that, and I know Elmore County does, and Otaga County, officers that particularly work with these type of individuals. Because their goal is not only to protect and help get that victim to safety, just as our goal is, but to also learn more about the business and learn more about who these offenders are.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One other question. You never mentioned drugs. How much does drugs come into play in all of this?
And that's an excellent point. I think from what we're seeing and from what the data is saying, typically individuals that have never been substance users or abusers often become involved in substance use after they've been involved in these type of businesses. They typically are innocent people off from the community. And part of that is being engaged with that new community's way of celebrating, recognizing each other, and they get involved that way. And of course, they become addicted. And of course, that's a part of power and control. If you need drugs, you need to go sleep with XYZ, and I will give you enough to help you with your fiend. So it's part of that engaging process typically, but you will be surprised. I'm just telling you, let's go back, and I've used that one because it's a famous case. Jeffrey Epstein, not one time any of those have ever talked about drug use. Not one time. So there are many big businesses that they don't have to use the drugs. The money is enough. They're flying them in, they're buying them XYZ. They may even obviously pay for housing for them to go back to their area for 4 or 5 months and just make sure that they are available and they're ready to fly them back. And never was any drugs used to continue that business. It was money used for that. So drugs are, that's a possibility on sometimes businesses to maintain the control. But if you have enough money and that's not part of your operations, drug use is not really prevalent. It's probably a 50-50 chance that drug use is being a part of this process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right, is that about it? Okay. Yeah. Leanne's over here asking me, I have one more caller that called in toward late. That would have been after Edgar, I think. Call in user 4 is what it says. Is that, could I get you to unmute and tell me your name, or you can send it to me in chat? Trying, yes. Oh, well, okay. All right. Well, I'll see everybody. I've called y'all's names out, so y'all know I've seen you, and we've got a list of everybody who is online that, so we're good just in terms of getting your training credits recorded. But thank you, Miss Marjorie. We appreciate it. That was very informative and kind of surprising on some aspects, because you just don't think how common it is. And
Correct.
that it
You're
could be
very,
your
very
next door
welcome. It was
neighbor.
my pleasure.
We appreciate it very much. And thank you everybody else for attending. And if you got any questions, let me know. Thank y'all.
Thanks to
You're very
all.
welcome.
Thank you, Miss Marjorie.
You're very welcome. Have a good evening.